It was Friday afternoon. Outside of Walmart, a little girl waved at Shaq O'Neal, but something was off. Her tiny hand shook, her wide eyes filled with fear. The man beside her gripped her wrist tighter, whispering something in her ear. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't excited. She was scared. And then, he immediately started pulling her toward the exit. Shaq's gut told him one thing. That little girl needed help. But could he reach her in time? What happened will make you stunned. Before continuing this amazing story, let us know where are you watching from. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel for daily stories notification. Let's begin the story. Shaquille O'Neal had always been a man of the people. Despite his fame, he loved doing everyday things. Grocery shopping, grabbing snacks, or just walking through Walmart like a regular guy. It was a Friday afternoon in Atlanta. The Walmart was packed with families, couples, and college students stocking up for the weekend. The air smelled of freshly opened cereal boxes, laundry detergent, and the faint rubbery scent of shopping cart wheels skidding across the polished floor. Shaq, dressed in a simple black hoodie and gray sweatpants, towered over the aisles, his massive 7 feet 1 inch frame making him stand out even when he didn't want to. He had a cart half full with protein shakes, eggs, and some snacks for later. A few people recognized him, whispering excitedly but respecting his space. As he turned into the frozen food section, something caught his eye. A little girl stood near the self-checkout lanes, gripping the edge of a shopping cart. She was no more than 7 years old, small and fragile, with dark skin and neatly braided hair tied with pink beads. She wore a simple pink dress and white sneakers that looked a little worn out. But it wasn't her clothes or her size that made Shaq stop. It was her eyes. Her wide brown eyes locked onto his, full of something silent and desperate. She wasn't crying, but her stare was heavy, like she was trying to tell him something without saying a word. Then, slowly, she raised her tiny hand and waved at him. Shaq frowned. Next to her stood a tall, thin white man in his late 40s, with greasy blonde hair, sallow skin, and a permanent scowl. He wore a faded blue hoodie, ripped jeans, and scuffed-up sneakers. His entire appearance screamed, "Out of place." The girl's small fingers twitched as she waved, and the man noticed. Instantly, his hand tightened around her wrist. She flinched. Shaq felt something deep in his gut. That instinct, that alarm that every trained athlete, soldier, or cop knows too well. Something wasn't right. The man bent down and whispered something in the girl's ear. Her little shoulders stiffened, and her eyes quickly darted away from Shaq, looking down at her sneakers. The man straightened up and looked around, paranoid, checking to see if anyone was watching. His grip on the girl's wrist didn't loosen. Then, without another word, he started walking toward the exit, pulling the little girl with him. Shaq felt his chest tighten. Something was really wrong. Shaq wasn't a cop. He wasn't FBI or some detective in a movie. But he had spent his life reading people. On the basketball court, in business, in life. And every bone in his body told him this wasn't right. He abandoned his cart right there in the aisle and followed them, keeping a distance. The man wasn't walking fast, but his movements were purposeful, controlled, tense. The girl's tiny legs struggled to keep up. Shaq's mind raced. Is this really a father and daughter? The girl's skin was dark, the man was pale. That didn't mean much. Adoption, step-parents, mixed families existed. But the way she didn't cling to him, didn't look comfortable, didn't look safe, that was the real red flag. And the biggest question, why did she wave at him like that? Shaq's heart pounded as they neared the exit. "Excuse me!" Shaq called out, his deep voice cutting through the noise of the busy store. The man froze for half a second, his body going rigid. Then, without turning around, He tightened his grip on the girl's arm and kept walking faster. Shaq picked up his pace. He wasn't about to let this slide. As they reached the exit, a Walmart security guard stood near the doors, arms crossed, watching for potential shoplifters. He was a white man in his 50s, with a beer belly and a bored expression. His name tag read, Rick Dalton. Shaq didn't hesitate. "Hey man, you need to stop that guy." He gestured toward the man dragging the little girl. Rick barely glanced up. "Why?" Shaq clenched his jaw. "Why?" "She waved at me like she was in trouble, and now he's pulling her away like she don't got a choice. Something's off." Rick sighed, already annoyed. "Sir, that's his kid. We don't interfere with family matters." Shaq's hands balled into fists. "You don't know that." The security guard finally looked at the man and girl, who were now just feet from the door. The girl still wasn't talking. She wasn't calling out for help, wasn't fighting, but her little body was tense, stiff, like she was too scared to act. Rick scratched his head, debating. Then he gave a dismissive shrug. "Unless she's screaming or fighting back, I got no reason to step in." Shaq's stomach twisted. If that was a black man pulling a little white girl like that, would he still be saying the same thing? He already knew the answer. Victor Kane must have realized Shaq wasn't backing off, because suddenly he broke into a run. With one violent yank, he pulled Ava toward the parking lot. Shaq took off after them. People turned to watch as a 7-foot NBA legend sprinted through Walmart, dodging carts and startled shoppers. A woman shrieked as Victor shoved past her, nearly knocking her over. "Hey, stop!" Shaq shouted, his powerful voice booming. Victor shoved open the glass doors and ran outside. Shaq was right behind him. The parking lot was chaos. Rows of cars, honking horns, the sun glaring down on the asphalt. Victor darted between cars, weaving through the maze of parked vehicles, heading toward a black SUV parked near the edge of the lot. Shaq's heart pounded. He was closing the gap. Just a few more feet. But then, tires screeched. The SUV's driver's side door flew open. A second man, wearing a mask, jumped out and grabbed Ava. Shaq lunged, but it was too late. The masked man tossed Ava into the SUV's back seat, and Victor dove in after her. The engine roared to life. Shaq reached the car just as it peeled out of the lot. Dust and exhaust filled his face. He slammed his hands against his knees, breathing hard, watching helplessly as the SUV vanished down the road. Gone. The little girl was gone. Shaq stood there, hands on his hips, sweat beading on his forehead. People gathered around, whispering, pulling out their phones. But no one had done anything. The security guard finally strolled outside, looking unimpressed. Well, if he was running, maybe it wasn't his kid. Shaq turned to him, his expression cold and unreadable. "You think?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Rick swallowed hard and looked away. Shaq exhaled, his fists still clenched. A little girl had waved to him for help, and he had failed her. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Shaquille O'Neal stood frozen in the Walmart parking lot, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His powerful hands were still balled into fists, his eyes locked on the empty stretch of asphalt where the black SUV had disappeared. Gone. The little girl, the one who had silently begged him for help, was gone. The frustration boiled inside him. He had been so close. 1 second faster, one longer stride, and he could have grabbed that man, could have stopped that SUV, could have done something. But now, Ava was out there, in the hands of men who had no business having a child with them. Shaq took a deep breath, pulling out his phone. 911. The operator picked up almost instantly. 911. What's your emergency? I just saw a child get kidnapped from the Walmart parking lot on Peachtree Road. A little black girl around 7 years old. She was taken by 2 men in a black SUV. You need to send someone now. Sir, can you describe the vehicle? Shaq closed his eyes, trying to replay the moment. Black SUV, tinted windows, no license plate on the front. The driver was wearing a ski mask. The guy with the girl, tall, white, late 40s, greasy blonde hair. She was wearing a pink dress. Did you see which direction the vehicle went? North, toward the highway. The operator continued asking questions. Shaq answered as best as he could, but he could feel the clock ticking. Every second mattered. We're dispatching officers now, the operator assured. Shaq exhaled sharply, pacing in place. But was that enough? He wasn't sure he trusted the police to handle this the way it needed to be handled. 5 minutes later, 2 squad cars rolled into the parking lot. 2 white officers stepped out, Sergeant Bill Carver and Officer Greg Willis. Sergeant Carver looked like he was in his late 50s, a thick belly straining against his uniform. His cold blue eyes swept the area with a mix of indifference and boredom. Willis was younger, maybe mid-30s, but carried the same air of disinterest. Shaq walked up to them immediately. Did dispatch tell you what happened? Carver gave a lazy nod. Yeah. Something about a missing kid? Shaq's jaw tightened. Missing? Like she had just wandered off? No, not missing, he said, his voice clipped. Kidnapped. I saw it happen. I tried to stop them. Carver sighed, pulling out a tiny notepad, like he was pretending to take this seriously. All right, he muttered. What's the girl's name? I don't know, Shaq admitted. But I'll bet you she's reported missing somewhere. A little black girl, 7 years old, pink dress. She waved at me for help before that man dragged her away. Carver barely reacted. And this was her dad, or... Shaq's blood boiled. You serious? I told you she was scared. She wasn't calling him Dad. She wasn't comfortable. Then he ran. Carver shrugged. Plenty of kids throw tantrums when their parents try to take them home. Shaq couldn't believe this. She didn't throw a tantrum, he said, his voice dangerously low. She waved at me for help. She was scared. And then she got shoved into a car with another man in a ski mask. Carver let out a slow breath, completely unconcerned. We'll check the security cameras. If we find anything, we'll follow up. Shaq's hands clenched into fists. This was how black children went missing and never got found. Shaq watched as the officers half-heartedly wrote things down, exchanged a few lazy words with the Walmart security guard, and then walked back to their car. No urgency, no immediate search. Just another case they would shrug off. Shaq had seen this before. When black children went missing, people didn't react the same way. If that had been a little blonde-haired white girl, there would already be helicopters in the sky. He refused to let Ava be another statistic. If the cops weren't going to move fast, he was. Shaq pulled out his phone again and scrolled through no. He needed someone who actually gave a damn. He found the number and hit call. A strong, confident female voice answered on the first ring. Shaq, what's up? Detective Jordan Miller. She was one of the few black female detectives in Atlanta's force, and she had spent her career fighting against corruption and racial bias. Shaq knew if there was anyone who'd take this seriously, it was her. Jordan, Shaq said, wasting no time. I just saw a little girl get kidnapped outside Walmart. I tried to stop it, but they got away in an SUV. The cops here don't give a damn. I need you to help me find her. Silence for half a second. Then Jordan spoke, her voice sharp and focused. Tell me everything. Shaq quickly ran through the details. Jordan listened without interrupting, then let out a curse under her breath. Damn it, that fits a pattern. Shaq froze. Pattern? Jordan sighed. Shaq, you ever heard about the missing black kids in this city? Shaq frowned. Yeah, I hear about kids disappearing all the time. But what does that have to do with this? Jordan hesitated. Then she said, because over a dozen black children have gone missing in the last 6 months. And every time someone tries to report it, the cases don't go anywhere. Shaq felt a cold chill crawl down his spine. Are you saying? I'm saying, Jordan cut in. Someone in the city is taking black children, and the system isn't looking for them. Silence. Shaq felt his stomach twist. Then he said the only thing that mattered. Then let's go find her. Jordan didn't waste time. She told Shaq to meet her at her office downtown, where she would start pulling any available reports on recently missing black girls matching Ava's description. Shaq grabbed his keys, his heart pounding. This wasn't just a random abduction. This was bigger. And if he didn't act fast, Ava might never come home. Shaq gripped the steering wheel tightly as he drove toward downtown Atlanta. His mind raced. 12 missing kids. How the hell had he never heard about this? Jordan had said it like it was an open secret. Something that had been happening in plain sight, but no one was paying attention. Ava was just one of them. And if Shaq didn't act fast, she'd be gone forever. He pulled into the parking lot of a plain brick building, the Atlanta Police Department's Special Investigations Office. Jordan Miller was already waiting outside. She was dressed in a dark blue blazer and jeans, her hair pulled into a tight bun. Her expression was unreadable, but Shaq saw the tension in her posture. You came fast, she said as he got out of the car. No time to waste, he replied. She nodded and led him inside. Jordan's desk was covered in files. She sat down and opened one, pulling out a photo of a young black girl. Talia Owens, she said, 9 years old, disappeared 3 months ago. She was last seen leaving her apartment to go to the store. The security cameras outside her building mysteriously malfunctioned that night. No leads. Case closed. Shaq clenched his jaw. Jordan pulled out another little black girl. Marie Ellis, 7. Vanished from a Walmart parking lot while her mother was inside shopping. Security cameras didn't catch anything. Case closed. She dropped the next one. Aisha Brooks, 11. Last seen getting into what witnesses described as a black SUV outside her school. The school cameras? Corrupted footage. Case closed. Shaq felt a sinking feeling in his gut. The SUV. A black SUV had taken Ava. And suddenly it wasn't just one kidnapping, it was a pattern. Jordan met his gaze. You see it now, don't you? Shaq exhaled slowly. Yeah, and I don't like where this is going. Jordan leaned forward. There's more. You know what these girls all had in common? Shaq shook his head. Jordan tapped the files. They were all last seen near a Walmart. Shaq's blood ran cold. Wait, you're telling me this is happening at multiple Walmarts? Jordan nodded grimly. Different locations, same pattern? And when parents try to report it? The cops drag their feet. The cases get written off as runaways or family disputes. They don't take them seriously. Shaq thought back to Sergeant Carver's dismissive attitude. The way Walmart security had just waved off his concerns. It wasn't incompetence. It was intentional. Jordan glanced at her phone. I tracked down a foster parent who reported her daughter missing 2 days ago. The police ignored her, but she's still looking for the girl on her own. Shaq sat up. Ava's foster mom? Jordan nodded. Rachel Carter. She's been begging the department for help, but they haven't done a damn thing. She agreed to meet us. Without another word, Shaq stood up. Let's go. Rachel. Carter's house was a small, modest home in a quiet neighborhood on the west side of Atlanta. The moment she opened the door, Shaq felt the exhaustion and grief radiating off her. She was a woman in her mid-40s, wearing a simple sweater and jeans. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she hadn't slept in days. Jordan introduced herself. "Ms. Carter, this is Shaquille O'Neal. He saw Ava right before she was taken." Rachel's breath hitched. Her hands trembled. You saw my baby?" Shaq nodded. "At Walmart. She waved at me. She looked scared. A man had her, and then they forced her into a car." Rachel's lip quivered. She took a shaky breath, then gestured them inside. She led them to a small living room cluttered with children's toys. On the coffee table, there were stacks of flyers with Ava's face on them. "I told them," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "I told the police she was taken. I told them Ava didn't run away. But they wouldn't listen." Shaq and Jordan exchanged a glance. Of course they didn't. Rachel grabbed a framed photo off the table and pressed it into Shaq's hands. It was a picture of Ava. She was grinning wide, her big brown eyes full of light. "My baby's out there," Rachel whispered. "Please bring her home." Shaq's throat tightened. He looked at Jordan. They couldn't fail. Jordan's phone buzzed. She checked it, then looked up sharply. "Lena just called me," she said. Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Lena?" "Lena Rodriguez," Jordan explained. "Investigative journalist. She's been covering child trafficking cases for years. She just got a tip about a trafficking operation running out of a warehouse, and she thinks it's connected to the Walmart kidnappings." Shaq's pulse quickened. "Where is it?" Jordan checked her phone again. "South Side, near an abandoned trucking depot." Shaq stood up. He already knew what he had to do. "Then that's where we're going." Shaq's SUV rumbled down the darkened streets of Atlanta's industrial district. The city lights faded behind him as they neared the warehouse district on the south side, an area mostly abandoned except for scattered trucking depots and a few shady businesses. Detective Jordan Miller sat in the passenger seat, her fingers drumming restlessly on the dashboard. Her face was tight with concentration. "This lead better be solid," she muttered. Shaq's grip tightened on the wheel. "It has to be." Lena Rodriguez had sent them a location, a large warehouse near the railroad tracks. She'd warned them that it was likely used for trafficking operations, and if Ava was still alive, she could be inside. As they turned onto a cracked asphalt road leading toward the warehouse, Jordan checked her gun. Shaq noticed. "You think we'll need that?" Jordan shot him a serious look. "I don't take chances." Shaq exhaled sharply. Neither did he. They parked at a distance behind an old chain-link fence. The warehouse loomed ahead, a massive structure with faded gray walls, a rusted metal roof, and no visible signs of activity. But as Shaq scanned the perimeter, he noticed something odd. A black SUV, just like the one Ava had been taken in, was parked near a side entrance. His stomach twisted. This was it. Jordan pointed to a nearby alleyway leading toward the back. "Let's get closer, quietly." They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. As they neared the side of the building, they heard muffled voices. Two men stood by the SUV smoking cigarettes. They were both white, dressed in dark clothes, with tattoos creeping up their arms. Jordan leaned in and whispered, "Recognize them?" Shaq narrowed his eyes. Then it hit him. One of them, the taller man with the snake tattoo on his neck, was in the Walmart parking lot. Shaq had seen him watching the store the day Ava was taken. His blood boiled. Jordan pulled out her phone and snapped a quick photo. "We need to ID them later. Right now, we need a way in." Shaq scanned the warehouse. There was a metal door on the side, slightly open. He nodded toward it. "There." Jordan pulled out her gun. "Follow my lead." They slipped inside. The warehouse was dimly lit, with stacks of wooden crates and metal containers everywhere. Shaq's footsteps felt too loud against the concrete floor. but Jordan moved like a shadow. Then, they heard voices, men talking, laughter, the clinking of bottles. Jordan peeked around a corner and cursed under her breath. Shaq looked. 4 men were gathered near a large table, counting stacks of cash. In the center of the table was a clipboard with photographs attached. Shaq's chest tightened. Photos of children. Ava's face was on one of them. His muscles tensed. He wanted to rush in and break every one of them in half. But Jordan held up a hand. "Not yet," she whispered. "We need backup." She pulled out her phone and texted someone. Shaq inhaled deeply, forcing himself to stay still. Then, a noise, a small whimper. Shaq's head snapped toward the sound. It came from a metal door at the back of the room. He moved before Jordan could stop him. She cursed. "Shaq, wait!" But he was already there, pressing his ear against the door. Another sound. A quiet sob. Shaq's heart pounded. The kids were inside. He grabbed the handle and pushed. Locked. One of the men at the table glanced up. "What the hell?" Shaq didn't wait. With a powerful kick, he slammed his foot into the metal door. It burst open. Inside, a row of terrified children huddled together. Some were crying. Some were too scared to move. And in the corner, Ava. Her small frame shook as she stared at Shaq, her eyes wide with disbelief. Shaq barely had time to react before he heard a gun cocked behind him. "Big mistake, jerk." Shaq turned slowly. The man with the snake tattoo was aiming a pistol at his head. Behind him, the other 3 men scrambled for their weapons. Jordan stepped into the doorway, her own gun raised. "Nobody move," she ordered, her voice sharp and deadly. The snake-tattooed man grinned. "Or what? You're outnumbered." Jordan didn't flinch. "You sure about that?" Suddenly, sirens wailed outside. Shaq smirked. Jordan's text. She'd called backup. Panic flickered across the men's faces. The one with the snake tattoo lunged for Ava. Shaq moved on instinct. He grabbed the man's wrist and twisted. A sickening crack echoed through the room as the gun dropped to the floor. The man screamed, but Shaq wasn't done. He grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "You like taking little kids?" Shaq growled. The man wheezed, trying to fight back, but Shaq hit him again. The others tried to run, but police swarmed the warehouse. Officers tackled them to the ground. Jordan handcuffed the snake-tattooed man herself. Shaq turned to Ava. She was shaking. He knelt beside her. "Hey, baby girl, you're safe now." She hesitated, then threw herself into his arms, sobbing. Shaq held her tight. "I got you," he whispered. "I got you." The warehouse was a storm of flashing lights, handcuffs, and shouting officers. Shaq sat on the back of an ambulance, holding a blanket around Ava's small shoulders. Jordan stood nearby, speaking to a fellow officer. Sergeant Bill Carver arrived, his face tight with anger. "You had no warrant," he snapped at Jordan. "This is gonna be a damn mess." Jordan cut him off. 12 kidnapped kids were inside. "Carver?" The sergeant's jaw clenched. "And guess what?" Jordan added. "Every one of them was black." Carver's face turned red. "I don't like what you're insinuating." Jordan stared at him. "I don't care what you like." Lena Rodriguez appeared, her camera rolling. "Sergeant Carver," she said, "would you like to comment on why so many black children have gone missing under your department's watch?" Carver paled. Shaq smirked. "Gotcha." That night, Shaq and Jordan drove Ava back to Rachel Carter's house. The moment Rachel saw her, she burst into tears. "My baby," she sobbed, hugging Ava tightly. Ava buried her face in Rachel's shoulder, clinging to her. Rachel looked up at Shaq, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Shaq swallowed the lump in his throat. "She waved at me," he said. "She asked for help, and I couldn't ignore it." Rachel squeezed his hand. Because you actually cared. Shaq looked at Ava. Her eyes weren't full of fear anymore. They were full of hope. And that was everything. The sun had barely started to rise when Shaq found himself sitting outside the Atlanta Police Department, leaning against his SUV, watching the city wake up. The adrenaline from the night's events was wearing off, leaving exhaustion in its place. The warehouse raid had exposed something much bigger than just Ava's kidnapping. 12 children had been rescued. 12 families were getting their babies back. But Shaq knew the fight wasn't over. Beside him, Detective Jordan Miller scrolled through her phone, reading the latest updates. She looked up and let out a tired sigh. They're already trying to bury it, she muttered. Shaq frowned. Who? Jordan turned the phone screen toward him. A local news article had been posted. Police raid warehouse in Atlanta. Alleged human trafficking ring under investigation. Alleged. That word made Shaq's stomach turn. They found 12 kids, he said, his voice dark. What's alleged about that? Jordan's jaw clenched. They don't want to admit how deep this runs. She scrolled again and stopped. Here we go. Lena's got it. Shaq leaned in. Lena Rodriguez had posted a breaking news piece of her own. Exposed. A secret child trafficking network targeting black children in Atlanta. Police corruption involved? Underneath, she had posted a video of the raid. The children being let out, Shaq carrying Ava in his arms, and Jordan confronting Sergeant Carver. And then, there was a list of names. Known traffickers. Police officers under investigation. Walmart security staff suspected of involvement. Shaq exhaled slowly. It was out now. No one could cover it up. Jordan leaned back against the SUV. You think this is enough? Shaq looked at her. It has to be. By mid-morning, the police station was in chaos. Reporters crowded the entrance, shoving microphones at every officer who walked by. Inside, tension ran high. Sergeant Bill Carver sat behind his desk, his face red as he listened to the internal affairs investigator grilling him. You're telling me, the investigator said, flipping through a report, that for years, missing black children were repeatedly classified as runaways, despite evidence of abductions. Carver wiped his forehead. That's just protocol. No, the investigator cut in. That's negligence. Carver gritted his teeth. Look, this is being blown out of proportion. Is it? The investigator tossed a file onto Carver's desk. Photos spilled out. Pictures of children, dozens of them, missing posters, case files marked closed without proper investigations. Carver's face paled. The investigator leaned forward. We found a direct connection between some of these cases and the warehouse. Do you want to explain how your department failed to notice this? Carver swallowed hard. This is ridiculous. I had no knowledge of... A knock on the door interrupted him. An officer stepped in, looking uncomfortable. Sir, he said, we have a warrant for your arrest. Carver shot up from his chair. What? The officer hesitated, but then pulled out the handcuffs. For obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Case files marked closed without proper investigations. Carver's face paled. The investigator leaned forward. We found a direct connection between some of these cases and the warehouse. Do you want to explain how your department failed to notice this? Carver swallowed hard. This is ridiculous. I had no knowledge of... A knock on the door interrupted him. An officer stepped in, looking uncomfortable. Sir, he said, we have a warrant for your arrest. Carver shot up from his chair. What? The officer hesitated, but then pulled out the handcuffs. For obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Carver turned to the investigator. This is a damn joke. The investigator stared at him coldly. Number... The joke is how many children suffered because of you." As Carver was led out in cuffs, reporters swarmed the hallway. Flashbulbs went off. Lena Rodriguez's voice cut through the noise. "Sergeant Carver, any comment on your arrest?" Carver scowled but said nothing. Lena turned to her camera crew. "This is just the beginning." Shaq sat across from Lena at a quiet diner, sipping his coffee while she typed furiously on her laptop. She glanced up. "This is bigger than I thought." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "How much bigger?" Lena turned the screen toward him. On it were leaked emails between Walmart executives and security firms. "The company knew," she said. "They were aware that certain stores were being used as trafficking hubs, and they let it happen." Shaq's grip tightened around his mug. "For what? Money?" Lena nodded grimly. "Always money. They get paid to look the other way. Traffickers use stores like Walmart because they're public, high-traffic areas. No one questions a man and a child walking out together." Shaq exhaled, his anger simmering. "And the security guard at the store?" he asked. "Rick Dalton?" Lena tapped a few keys and pulled up his record. "He has a history of complaints," she said. "But he was never fired. He was transferred between locations." Shaq clenched his jaw. "Did they arrest him?" Lena nodded. "Yeah. But the bigger question is, who else is involved?" Shaq knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. A week after the rescue, Ava Carter sat in a small studio staring at the camera. Her tiny hands clutched a stuffed bear. Her foster mother, Rachel, sat beside her, holding her close. Across from them, Lena Rodriguez adjusted her microphone. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Ava nodded hesitantly. Lena smiled reassuringly. "Take your time. Just tell us what happened in your own words." Ava swallowed. "The man who took me, he said my foster mom didn't want me anymore, that no one would come looking." Rachel squeezed her hand, tears brimming in her eyes. "That was a lie, baby." Ava nodded but looked down. "I was really scared. There were other kids. Some of them were hurt." Lena's face softened. "You were very brave, Ava." Ava hesitated, then turned to the camera. "I waved at Mr. Shaq because I thought maybe he would help me. And he did." Shaq, watching from behind the cameras, felt his throat tighten. Lena smiled. "And what would you say to other kids who might be scared?" Ava took a deep breath. "If you think something is wrong, tell someone. Even if they don't listen at first. Keep trying." Shaq felt a weight in his chest. Ava had been lucky. But how many other kids never got that chance? Lena's interview with Ava went viral. Within days, news stations across the country picked up the story. Protests erupted. People demanded justice for the missing children who had been ignored for so long. The FBI launched an official investigation into child trafficking networks in major retail stores. More arrests followed. But for Shaq, the biggest impact was something more personal. One evening, he received a message from an unknown number. It was a picture. A young girl, smiling, holding up a handwritten sign. "Thank you for saving us." Shaq's chest tightened. Jordan, standing next to him, peeked at the screen. She smiled. "That's why we do this." Shaq nodded. "Yeah. For Ava. For every child who never got the chance to wave for help." Months later, Shaq sat on a stage looking out at a packed auditorium. He adjusted the microphone. "This isn't about me," he said. "This is about kids who go missing and nobody listens. That has to change." The crowd erupted in applause. Jordan, standing nearby, nodded in approval. Lena was already working on her next investigation. Ava was back home, safe. But Shaq knew one thing for certain. This fight wasn't over. And he wasn't walking away. Not now. Not ever. Guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. Let us know about your thoughts in the comment section. Also, subscribe the channel for daily stories notification.